What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Brian with Exact Cybersecurity and IT. Welcome to another daily cybersecurity news video where we talk about what is in the news and what is in our threat intelligence report so you can be better aware and better defend your businesses from these cyber thugs that are out there today. There we go. Sorry about that. Didn't look like I was on YouTube, but it looks like I am now. So again, it's Brian with Exact Cybersecurity and IT. Welcome back to the channel. We're going to jump into the story that I have up on the screen first. This Oracle, this could be a big one. If you don't know, I do a weekly cybersecurity podcast called Security Squawk. We stream it here on YouTube as well. You can check it out. We talked about this story on that podcast on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we only knew it as a report from a cyber criminal who said they had compromised the Oracle system in some way, and Oracle had denied it. Well, a few days later, we're learning a lot more. Security researchers have looked into it. So I'm going to try a little thing here where I read some of the article with the computer here, and then I'll give you my take on what I think is going on and what businesses need to be aware of around this. But I think my audio will come through to you here. So if you don't hear it, let me know in the chat. So I'm going to stop it there. But, what we have is Oracle Health experiencing a breach involving their legacy Cerner data migration servers, which exposed patient data from electronic health records. The attackers used compromised customer credentials to access and exfiltrate the data, and Oracle has not publicly disclosed the breach, but is assisting hospitals with templates for patient notifications. So the awareness that we need to have around this as cyber defenders and people who are trying to just protect this type of information, protected health information from falling in the hands of the wrong people, is that you have to understand that these legacy systems are often vulnerable due to outdated security measures and things like compromised credentials. So it's a good idea to obviously regularly audit decommissioned legacy systems, which it sounds like they were in the process of doing. But unfortunately, they left these systems kind of out there for the taking, and a very smart and very advantageous threat actor decided to take advantage of this, and it put this all these healthcare organizations that were moving off of this old legacy system into the Oracle Cloud into a really bad spot to where they now have to personally deal with this data breach themselves. And we've seen data breaches where third-party organizations are breached and they put the onus of notification and all of that on the organizations. And quite frankly, that doesn't play out well come class action lawsuit time or lawsuit time. So I've got to imagine that the healthcare entities that were impacted by this data breach at Oracle are going to go after Oracle pretty hard, because they're going to incur costs when it comes to the notification and then dealing with any situation that may arise from these medical records ending up in the hands of the wrong people. As we saw with the Lehigh Valley Health Network hack, where patients' nude photos and x-rays ended up on the dark web for sale. They paid a pretty penny for their data breach when that ended up in the courts. So, when you're doing these types of migrations and you're moving from legacy systems, it's always a good idea to enforce strict access controls and make sure multi-factor authentication for sensitive systems is enabled. So if you have to put that behind something like a firewall or a SASE and enable that multi-factor authentication, it's a really good idea to do so. And then make sure you're training your staff on the risk, and make sure that everyone who's involved is aware of these risks through training and awareness that you develop because of this particular situation. You may need to let people know that these things are happening and there is a risk in place as a result of what, the migration that was going on. And you also need to make sure that your employees are aware that credential theft in any way can lead to bigger issues. We see it all the time where companies are an employee is phished. They click on the link, they type in their username and password, and typically what we find is that they're reusing those username and passwords. So you're making it really easy for cyber criminals to then jump to another system with the same credentials and potentially get in. And that's probably what happened here with Oracle, is that this threat actor found the systems available to them, and then they went, on the dark web and found credentials of different healthcare organizations that may potentially have used this and use those old credentials to get into these old legacy systems. It's also a good idea to make sure you're implementing robust monitoring on your systems, whether they're cloud-based or they're internal, and make sure you know who and where they're accessing your information from. So you should be able to identify unusual access patterns or data exfiltration attempts by simply putting monitoring 24/7 on these critical assets. It's pretty much a requirement in most like HIPAA and any compliance that is really out there today. You need to be doing this stuff with a 24/7 security operations center, and sending information to eyes and ears who can watch these things for you around the clock, because cyber criminals, they don't sleep. They continue to wreak havoc and do these things to businesses on a daily basis. And unfortunately, organizations don't have these things in place to deal with these threats the way that I'm laying out here in the video today. So if you have any questions about this kind of stuff, drop it in the chat. We are monitoring it. And if you have any questions about anything I say, or you want to chime in on your insight, we encourage it greatly and appreciate the support. So moving right along, we have a new threat out there that is a browser native ransomware, and it's a growing threat to enterprise data. So interesting little twist on ransomware and how they're deploying it. Typically requires a threat actor to get access to the operating system. Typically Windows is the one that threat actors like to go after the most. And then they have to get around all kinds of tripwires that cyber defenders like me set up on computers to prevent anyone from really taking advantage of those systems. And this particular, threat that is emerging, this ransomware operates entirely within web browsers, which is really scary. And what they try to do is they try to target SaaS applications and cloud storage through your browser. So it exploits browser-based authentication and identity systems, which bypass traditional endpoint defenses. Your EDR tools, your antivirus tools, they typically don't look inside the browser itself at what it's doing and if it could potentially be doing something malicious or nefarious to your cloud applications. It's really only worried about the files that are on the system that you're using, and it monitors those for any bad behavior or a threat actor that may be trying to do something to the system. Browser native ransomware is a growing threat as businesses increasingly rely on these cloud services. So what do you do in this situation, right? You have to make sure that you're restricting third-party app permissions and regularly reviewing what you're granting your users access to. This is done through, if you're an M365 user, this is done through Azure policies and things like that, making sure that you're not allowing users to just connect things into your M365 environment. That is how you stop things like this. They can also encrypt files on Google Drive if you're a Google Workspace user. These are all systems that you need to monitor tightly and closely now that these types of threats exist. So make sure that you know what plugins, what apps you've granted permission to your users and what they're doing. And if you don't need them or you don't know what they're doing, have an administrator go through and remove them. Because sometimes, if you don't have things set up properly, users can just add this stuff and you're completely unaware that it's even happening. It's also a good idea to use browser security extensions and endpoint protection solutions capable of detecting browser-based threats. Not all EDRs created equal, and not all EDRs configured properly by the administrators who deploy them to your computers. So make sure you're looking at endpoint solutions that have these options to protect the browser. And more importantly, if you have these things, make sure you're turning them on, because a lot of times when we go in and assess an organization's cybersecurity posture, we find that their IT team, failed to recognize that they needed to enable these things because they're not turned on by default, or there's some configuration that needs to be done that the IT team did not configure. So it's important that you make sure that you're not only buying solutions that have this protection, but you're configuring it properly as well. And as always, educate your employees about these phishing schemes that may lead to granting unauthorized access to these browsers. It's the number one way that these criminals like to exploit this type of vulnerability is they send a simple phishing email that you click on and it gets you to install something typically within the browser, which typically doesn't require any passwords or admin level privileges. So that's a bigger concern for the enterprise who thinks they have systems locked down and they really don't. And then on top of that, employee awareness training and making sure that your employees understand what the threat is that's being sent their way and what to do if they accidentally click on these things and potentially install something. You also want to make sure that you're detecting it, because employees don't always like to run out there and say, hey, I just downloaded something off the internet and installed it on my computer. Sometimes they just shut the computer down and go home for the weekend. So you're going to want to have that detection layer in place and monitor your endpoints and your SaaS applications for these types of threats. There's things called indicators of compromise. Indicators of compromise are little earmarks or little fingerprints that cyber criminals and malware leave behind that cyber defenders can look for and potentially stop these threats from spreading even further. So this is very interesting, a new twist. As always, cyber security and cyber threats are always evolving and ever changing. And this is a new, essentially non-admin required thing that can be installed that can really do damage to your cloud environments and especially your cloud storage applications. So if you have any questions on this, again, drop them in the comments below. We got a few more topics. They're scrolling across the bottom so you can kind of see what we're talking about today. They're also in the description. I'm going over what's in the news right now. And I am going to go over what's in our threat intelligence report from my threat intelligence team here in a few minutes. But this is BlackLock Ransomware. I pulled up this BlackLock, how to remove it. It's a ransomware group. But the interesting thing with this group that I have up on the screen with their decryptor is that two groups actually, Resecurity, compromised BlackRock's ransomware infrastructure, disrupting its operations, and another group, Dragonforce, later defaced BlackLock systems. And this highlights vulnerabilities even among cyber criminals. And I've talked about this forever, since I've been on YouTube and since I've started our podcast 4 years ago over on Security Squawk. We know that cyber criminals don't do cybersecurity very well. And so this is an interesting take to me that, these, private cybersecurity companies are now, and I don't know if this is in retaliation because they were getting hacked themselves or a customer of theirs got hacked, so they decided to retaliate. But it's an interesting tactic that private companies are now actually breaking the law and deciding to take things into their own hands. It's an interesting quandary because they're going after criminals themselves, but it is against the law to hack into it's unauthorized to go into computers unauthorized, no matter who they are. So threat actors can be vulnerable, indicating the importance of proactive security measures, obviously. And there are other reasons that I have concerns around cyber criminals not, being able to secure their environments well, that I'm not going to talk about today. But I've talked about it a lot in the past. So you need to make sure that you're, aware that this is happening out there, that private cybersecurity companies are deciding to take matters into their own hands and kind of hack back. The catch-22 to that is then you just make the cyber criminals even more angry, and they want to come back at you even more. But it is definitely something that's going on out there, which is why it's a good idea to subscribe to what's known as threat intelligence feeds to monitor ransomware group activities and prepare your defenses and understand which groups are actively increasing their activity and against what industries or companies they're doing so. This could be something where the threat actors just decide to turn around and go after all IT companies in the next weeks and months ahead, because these cybersecurity companies decided to go after these cyber criminals. So we'll see what happens. It's a very interesting scenario that's playing out. That cyber criminals are getting hacked by private cybersecurity companies. We usually see our federal government doing this type of activity. But today, we are seeing private cybersecurity companies, for whatever reason, taking things into their own hands. I don't recommend it. Like I said, it is still against the law to access systems unauthorized, so don't do it. It's just interesting that it's happening. So moving into our threat intelligence segment here, guys, we're going to talk about, I think we have 3 or 4 articles that came through in our threat detection, from our threat detection team that I can talk about that are publicly disclosed. We'll kind of talk about what they are and what they mean for you and why you should be concerned as either a business owner or a cyber defender trying to, fend off these cyber criminals as part of your role as an IT person at your company. So this is CoffeeLoader Malware. This is a new type of GPU-based encryption and call stack spoofing to bypass endpoint detection systems. So again, these EDR tools, these endpoint detection tools, in other words, your antivirus of today, looks for certain things and activities on computers, and it looks in certain places. And as we see, cyber criminals are always pivoting, always looking how to get around these tools' defenses. And they're essentially, like they're doing with the browser-based attack that I talked earlier, they're using these advanced malware loaders to basically stack and spoof and bypass endpoint detection, meaning the endpoint can't see it or the endpoint isn't looking where it's actually being deployed and executed. So these advanced malware loaders becoming more sophisticated in evading detection, and you need to be aware of this as we're trying to make sure that you're defending all the layers of the network that you actually need to defend, and defending the endpoint is very important. So making sure that you have an advanced EDR solution capable of detecting GPU-based threats is key. A lot of EDR tools, again, are not made the same. They don't do the same thing. They don't look in the same places, and they're not able to detect the same threats. There are very sophisticated EDR programs out there, and there's basic EDR programs out there. So if you want something that's going to detect GPU-based threats, you need to get something that's a little more sophisticated than maybe your average SOHO or small business EDR antivirus software. You're more than likely going to want to get something that's managed by a group of individuals or a third-party team, and it's not something that just generates alerts and sends it to your inbox or your email. That's the kind of sophistication or level of security and detection and response that I'm talking about. If you have any questions about this, obviously drop it in the chat. Happy to answer you. Make sure you're updating these endpoint security tools, folks, with the latest signatures. It needs to be able to find what's out there and what it knows about. And it's a really good idea to use something that's called application or process allow listing and block executables that you don't know about. Because a lot of these threats require a GPU, but it fires off processes. And if you can limit or kind of zero trust the processes that run on your endpoints, this is an extra layer of protection that you can put in place above and beyond your EDR. So your EDR essentially, it will detect known processes and bad and anomalous activity and bad activity on your computers for very common processes. But if a cyber criminal creates a process as part of his malware, that's really hard for these EDR systems to detect. And that's where solutions like zero trust process control or application whitelisting come into play, and why they are valuable tools for cyber defenders. So if you have any questions, again, definitely ask them. But this CoffeeLoader malware, very sophisticated, runs inside of GPUs to evade EDR detection, which means you need to have other layers of defense in your tool chest to deal with these particular threats. So moving right along, as part of our threat report, we have this interesting article about DeepSeek users being targeted with fake sponsored Google ads that deliver malware. So cybercriminals are using fake sponsored Google ads to deliver malware disguised as legitimate downloads, and these mimic trusted brands like DeepSeek, if you trust DeepSeek. Sponsored ads can be exploited by attackers to distribute malware. So ads that run on certain ad networks, and Google is an ad network, for example, but they do a very good job of trying to weed out cyber criminals or threat actors who are pushing people to malicious websites through their ads. Not all sponsored ad platforms are created equal. So while Google does a good job, some things do slip through the cracks there for Google, and other ad platforms don't do as good of a job of detecting these threats on the other side of their ads. Plus, they're very easy for threat actors to evade, automated detections by these ad platforms by using services like Cloudflare to hide what's on the other side of their scam or their threat. So the idea and how you prevent these types of things, folks, is, just really avoid clicking on sponsored ads. Instead, go to the official website yourself. Meaning, if you see an ad and you want to click on it because you might want to buy that product, or you might want to look at what that ad is, find the URL, go to Google, search it on Google first, and don't click on any sponsored ad links. All the ad links that show up in Google say sponsored. Most ads on the web that show up say sponsored. Don't click on those. Click on the organic search results. That's the safest way to deal with this type of problem, and make sure that you're not going to get exploited. So if you see up on the screen here, you have this sponsored ad, and it looks like you're going to download the DeepSeek tool, but it's really not the DeepSeek tool. It's this deepseek.ai.soft.com domain. And if you're not smart enough to pick up that that's not really their domain, and how, a lot of people don't know this stuff because DeepSeek's new. They don't take the time to actually go research what is DeepSeek's actual domain. And they end up falling for these scams and these things. And unfortunately, that's how these cyber criminals spread this malware. So above and beyond just avoid clicking on sponsored links, as a general rule of thumb, use ad blockers to filter out malicious advertisements. You can get those for free as browser plugins in most popular browsers. So I would highly recommend that you add those. And most security suites have some kind of ad blocker that you can add into your operating system and your browsers automatically. And I highly recommend that you go into the settings and find that area about browsers and see if that's installed. And if it's not, make sure you get those security tools installed on your system. And verify the legitimacy of advertisers by inspecting their profiles in search results, right? New companies are popping up all the time, and you should not trust these ads all the time because cyber criminals know human behavior. They study it, and they know that they can create systems and ads that look like legitimate software and applications that you use. They can even create products and things that look like shopping carts that are really not the product or the shopping cart that you're buying. It's malware that they're going to distribute on your system. This is all of the things that they look at and they use to build these scams and hack people. And you want to make sure that you're doing things like I mentioned, going to Google, searching for the company rather than clicking on the ad, and going directly to the site that the ad is sending you to. The other piece of technology that you can deploy in this situation is employing something called DNS filtering solutions to block malicious domains. These DNS filtering solutions are very good at sniffing out malicious activity and malicious domains. And then these kind of like you can think of this as the air traffic controller of the internet. And as your traffic requests to go to a certain place, that air traffic controller is going to say, nope, that's a known bad area, or we're detecting something malicious over there. So we're not going to allow you to take that flight path, and we're going to block you and deny you that access. So that's a really good solution to put in place either on your endpoint layer or your network layer through your firewall to better protect your users, so if they do fall for clicking on an ad, or they do let their guard down and click on an ad, there's technology in place that can prevent those things from turning into things like ransomware. And then we move on to this other article that we have around phishing-as-a-service operation that uses DNS over HTTPS for evasion. And that's a whole mouthful for just saying that this phishing-as-a-service platform uses DNS over HTTPS and MX record queries to dynamically spoof over 100 brand login pages, making it highly evasive. So in other words, cybercriminals are creating these fake pages and fake websites and using sophisticated phishing campaigns, targeting user with brand-specific fake login pages like Google, Workspace, Microsoft 365. So you want to make sure that you're doing things, this DNS over HTTP, otherwise known as DOH, you want to make sure that you're blocking DOH traffic at the network level unless you're required to do it. Most organizations don't need this kind of traffic moving through their network because it's not typical. It's anomalous behavior, quite frankly. So it's behavior that if you detect it, you should be able to shut it down, but you can block it from the get-go if you have a good firewall in place that has the ability to filter or block traffic. You can also implement things like email filtering solutions with anti-phishing capabilities to make sure that these phishing emails do not get to your user's inbox in the first place, because if they do, you need to it's going to be very easy for them to display these web pages that are fake to steal your users' legitimate usernames and passwords for the different third-party applications, cloud applications, email applications that you use in your business. So make sure you train your employees to identify these phishing threats and avoid clicking suspicious links. And then last thing to notice is these EDR. The last thing in our report is these EDR killer links ransom hub with Play, Medusa, BianLian gangs. And these groups are now deciding, as I mentioned before, EDR on the show, they're using this EDR kill shifter tool to disable endpoint detection systems by exploiting vulnerable drivers, meaning the drivers used in your EDR could be vulnerable, and they've figured this out, and they've built software or malware, and then when they deploy it, it could literally shut down your EDR, giving them further access to your system, basically destroying a layer of your defenses. So you really are hamstrung knowing that somebody's doing something malicious in your environment. And it's been linked to ransomware gangs, as I mentioned, like Play, Medusa, and BianLian. It's a significant threat because it disables a critical security defense before they deploy the ransomware. So make sure that when you deploy your EDR tool, you're doing things like enabling tamper protection. That is a mechanism in the EDR tool that's built in to know if somebody's trying to mess with one of its critical processes, that will turn it off or shut it down. There's various things that the EDR tool will do, like shut down or reboot the system or isolate the system if it detects somebody is trying to shut it down. Make sure you're doing things like restricting driver installation privileges. That should only be able to be done by an administrator and not a regular user. And monitor for for what's known as bring your own vulnerable driver techniques. Make sure you're monitoring for them using an EDR tool or something along those lines. So you understand, and you do that through an EDR and a SOC and a SIEM, and you can also do it, as I mentioned before, using zero trust process control or application allow listing. So make sure you're looking for signs of these driver exploitation and attempts to disable your EDR process. These are all things that a 24/7 security and operations center could detect for you and on your behalf. So be aware of these threats. If you have any questions, drop them down below in the comments. That wraps up what's in the news for today, March 28th, 2025, as well as a snapshot of our threat report and the different new vulnerabilities that cybercriminals are using to attack your organizations. I hope you found this information helpful. If you have, give us a like and hit the comment section. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.